Has the market changed its mind about what the Fed may do next?
We have got to get inflation behind us. I wish there were a painless way to do that. There isn't.
I think this is a two-part policy mistake of historic proportion.
I think the odds of a recession in 2023 are very high.
I think you'd offer the American people an apology.
With Financial Stockholm. Today is Wednesday, October 5th, 2022, and these are the views from the Swedish market. My thoughts and what we've seen in the market over the past day or developing this morning. To point out, we had a nice ray of sunshine coming in through the market where we saw a bright up day in the Swedish stocks. This morning, it's a little bit mixed and we may get a lower trend. The US futures had been indicating up and then slightly lower. A lot of this is attributed to what's going on with yield curves. We did see the Swedish Kronor gain back a little bit on the dollar, but just to preface, I am a negative bias right now, so I do not see the fundamentals in place to say it's a bull rally, nor would I look to see it as a short-term rally, but that's based on my bias and my bias based on the fundamentals. So if you can make money in the market, please do, and make as much as you can and take it home when you can. But in general, the overall picture is still clouded with the war clouds of what's going on in the Ukraine and with Russia. We do see that Ukraine is moving to throw the Russians out, and the claims that they're making moves forward are being widely publicized. And while that may be great for the Ukrainian military, my concern there is what's happening to the Ukrainian citizens and how they're going to get through this year and the coming years, because here in Europe we're complaining about high price of oil, or maybe I can't get my favorite peanut butter, but this is nothing like what's compared to war, where people are living in holes to survive bomb shelling. And on that note, we do see an acceleration of the militarization. You have the comments locally, this is in the European press, that France is not giving enough weapons to NATO for the Ukraine. So you do see this ramp up of the rhetoric for the military approach and what's happening there. And so also in the United States press, you see that Ukraine has captured a Iranian drone, and they have an entire drone that was captured that was used by the Russians. And they're going to research it and see maybe how they can do jamming, or maybe they'll be able to hack it and turn it around and blow up the other guys. I don't know. But that's a key issue in terms of the militarization, because that factors into what's happening with the United States and Iran on the Iran deal, and whether or not Iran could become the oil port for China, if the US can turn around Iran and maybe make them quote unquote more friendly towards the West, and whether the West would get some of their oil and gas. But that's a little bit longer term. And I think overall what you see as well is when you're looking at the war clouds building, North Korea launched a missile over Japan. It traveled 2,500 miles in 7 minutes. Apparently it was traveling at 17 times the speed of sound. And this is I think 23rd rocket launch by the North Koreans. So we're looking at an increased chance of the Chinese lapdog, North Korea, barking and biting at anybody that gets near. And this is an amp up of the rhetoric. Now, we hadn't seen that over the past 4 years. We did see a little bit with the previous administration, and they had an initial trade of insults, but there was no trade of weapons or missiles over Japan. There was a cessation of a lot of that. And you had the first US president visiting there. So we're really in a completely different climate now. And with the war talk being ramped up, it's really very unnerving. And what I'm most troubled by is if you look at the strategy that's been employed in Europe, especially in the investment cycle, and you look at things like the green bonds being in primary focus in the United States and Europe, where you have the major banking institutions looking at green strategies and investment, where this would equal over, say, $1 trillion this year is the expected forecast from SEB and their green bonds report. You would wonder and think maybe there would be more environmental activists and maybe more people who have been pushing for ESG policies saying there should be peace talks and saying that we shouldn't destroy the world. We already had one incredibly bad environmental disaster with the methane leaks coming out of the Baltic Sea here, and as a result of the explosions and sabotage with the Nord Stream 1 and 2. And so you have a very, very dangerous situation, and we have a catastrophic situation occurring with war. War is never good for the environment. Nobody's actually measured, or I haven't seen any real reports on the effects of a 20-year war in Afghanistan, what that did for the world and what it's done for pollution. Certainly, you can ask the Afghanis, and they don't think it's been very good. There are some who, but anyway, the point is war is not good for the environment, and this would be a very catastrophic situation and effectively the worst environmental disaster that we've ever seen. And then focusing on what's happening in Ukraine and what that means for Sweden, the short-term effect of the cutoff of gas and the power grid to Europe has been dramatic. So in Sweden, we've seen that E.ON has announced, in accordance with the planning, that we will have freeze outs. We will have times of day where we don't have power. And we're in the quote unquote developed world. So E.ON, which is one of our larger suppliers down here in the more southern part of Sweden, have already announced that they're going to start doing this, and it may start happening this week or next week. And you have quotes from a region head. We've seen our electricity prices spiking and jumping around this morning. This morning they were at 77 ora per kilowatt hour, and then they've now dropped down to 42 Kronor, which is still higher than it was last year, but it's bouncing around. It went all the way up to the highest part I saw was 83. And the governments have been preparing everybody for this eventuality of higher electricity prices, and not to be able to take the liberty or the advantage of cheaper electricity and using it to build business, because that's what happens when you have efficiency of energy. You use more of it, and as you use more of it, you're generally developing society, you're generally developing a GDP, and that wouldn't be happening when you have a higher price. It's a natural tax, and it's a natural hindrance. And so which brings us to the next part of this, is that what happens if we did get all the gas back on, which we can't because of Nord Stream 1 and 2 being deactivated, but we still don't look at a secure future in energy security, because in Europe, where you have most of the power generation coming out of Germany, and German power used to have 30% of its power coming out of the nuclear reactors, but they've shut those down, so there's only 2 left, and that's able to provide 4% for them. You have a country like Italy, which now no longer has any gas coming from Russia, and shut their nuclear reactors down in the 1990s. We look at a very strained and under pressure grid. And the key to the grid is constant power at the time needed. And that falls into the next part of the ESG strategy, is when you have unreliable sources of sustainable energy, you don't have a reliability. So it's sustainable, unreliable, and you need a constant hertz coming through your system to power the electricity. And if you don't have that, you run into big issues, and you see events like you've seen in California is a great example. Texas last year in the wintertime was another great example of what happens to a grid when it's under pressure and it can't meet the demands. And then you get these brownouts, and then you get shutdowns. And so you can look at that. There's a report attached which will go more in detail on this, but the problem is that the 55 law, so that's our 55% reduction in the emissions, is not achievable on the current timetable. It is not an achievable factor, nor is the build out or the investment into the grid being made to actually achieve it. And while it's great that we have quote unquote non-polluting factors like windmills and solar panels, these are not going to be online, nor are they going to be able to deliver the amount of power, nor do they deliver the power throughout the entire grid system. So power generated in the North Sea by these windmills only reaches northern Germany. It doesn't go all the way down to southern Germany. And you still have to build the power lines, and those haven't been built. And so while you've had a project ongoing for 20 years, it's still not achieved. And nor can you just snap your fingers and build this. This is a heavy undertaking. When you do it, you've got to do ground and land surveys. You have to understand the matrix that you're working within, and then you actually have to lay the cable, then you have to connect it to the grid and provide the power. And then you have the problems with ohms and ergs and transmission and bends in the line, creating more resistance. So these problems have yet to be overcome. And we go into the dark winter months very soon, where we have lower wind, and we have here in the Nordics almost no solar, and they have these periods as well in Germany, despite the fact that they're in what we like to think of as southern Italy, or not southern Italy, but southern Europe, excuse me. And so you have a scenario where we're coming into this period where we cannot rely on the sustainable environment or sustainable energy producers, and the major producers like Germany are going to have to switch over to coal. They could do something that would be very easy or possible, which would take a roughly 6-month period, and that would be doing something like reactivating nuclear plants, bringing them back online, which they could probably do in, say, maybe a period of something like 6 months, and then we would have a dramatic energy demand drop, or demand on production drop, and then we could have a sustainable price or livable price within our energy, because we'd actually have quite a bit back online and quite a bit more to share. So those are just a couple points and why. But remember, I'm still negative and I'm biased, and that's my viewpoint. But you should make money in the market where you can. And we have a number of people. We recently spoke with Anders Haglund, and his trading views turned out to be right now. So that's great. If you can make that money, go ahead and do it. But other than that, in the local press, we don't see a lot here in Sweden. There's a lot more focus on what's going on abroad. You do see the US rally going up. That may be more tied to the politics and looking like the Republicans would take back the House. And there's a possibility that the Republicans would be able to achieve a Senate victory. And then you would have an ineffective government doing nothing, not passing any laws. And the only laws that would come out would be through presidential proclamation or decree, and instead of going through the lawmaking channels and chambers of commerce, or excuse me, chambers of Congress. So that may be part of why you see the market rallying for the US, because you have a continued plateau. You don't have any real change. So the bad news is bad, but there's no real change. So why not accept it? And but in the Nordics, you know, the only news I see really concerning Norway, you do see fairly stable oil rig rates. You do see that in the Wall Street Journal, they're focusing on this chess match where the Norwegian hero Magnus Carlsen lost to the American, who has admitted to cheating twice and is suspected, according to the Journal, of having cheated at least 100 times. And if you look at the comments there, so that's interesting, I guess. But I would focus more on the energy coming out of Norway and the benefits they could have coming into Europe, and any new pipelines coming out, as they're already providing, say, 40% of the energy need for the natural gas and electricity production to England, and 25% to Europe. And now they've just completed the Baltic pipe, and it's up and running. And that's going to go to Poland and can go to Germany, and we'll see if they're building any more. I haven't seen any other new builds coming out, but we'll keep an eye. And then out of Denmark, shipping rates, you know, the Baltic dry freight rate would be the key indicator there, but nothing really coming out of the Nordic news cycle today, other than the Swedish government looks like it's going to be in place, and we'll have achieved our target by the 14th of October for the Swedish government, and we wait to see what the policies are. So that's it for today from Stockholm. And I'm going to wish you a great day, and hope you can make money. Always make hay while the sun is shining, and enjoy that. Okay, thank you very much.